My name's Daniel Roy, and today I'm going to talk to you about the neuroscience of magic. I'm going to show you how magicians can trick your brain into tricking you. This is 10 Levels of Deception. I'm going to perform a series of short demonstrations in one continuous take. And I'm going to interrupt myself from time to time to explain why the deception works. But the demonstrations themselves are all in one continuous take. So, to get started, I'm going to give these cards some shuffles and some cuts. Now, level one is that a magician's biggest advantage in deceiving you is that you don't know what's going to happen yet. If you did know what was going to happen in advance, it would be very difficult to trick you. Now, for level two, we're going to play a game together. So, I want you to hold your right hand out in front of you, palm up, like this. Now, I know we're on video, but I really want you to do it. I really want you to follow along. So I'll wait. Okay, hopefully your right hand is palm up out in front of you like this. Now, if you wanted to turn your right hand palm down, you would have to move your wrist, right? There's no way to turn your right hand palm down without moving the wrist. This time, however, turn your palm up and now don't move the wrist. Do not move the wrist at all. Okay, first, point your arm up like this. Now bring it down over your heart and then back out in front of you. Then point it up again, bring it down over your heart and back out in front of you. And lo and behold, your right hand is now palm down even though you didn't move your wrist. So why does this game work? Well, it's based on false assumptions. We have false assumptions about how our own forearm works. We think that in order to turn our hand over, we have to move our wrist. That's not what's happening. You actually have two bones in your forearm called the radius and the ulna, and when you turn your hand palm down, those bones cross over each other. So when you bring your hand up and then bring it down over your heart like this, you're beginning to cause those bones to cross. Repeat the process again, and the bones fully cross over each other. So now your hand is palm down, but it feels like you didn't move your wrist because you didn't do the obvious wrist turning motion that we all associate with turning our hand palm down. Now think about that for a moment. We spend all of our waking hours with our own forearms, and yet we still harbor false assumptions about how they work. Now, if you carry false assumptions about how something works, well, a magician basically doesn't have to apply any extra layers of trickery. You already have some misconception about reality that a magician can use to their advantage. Of course, you can layer many other levels of deception on top of this, but sometimes just a single false assumption is enough. For level 3, we're going to play another game. So this time, hold both hands out in front of you like this. Now, turn your thumbs so that they point downward, and then cross one hand over the other, and then clasp your fingers together like this. But hold your hands up a little higher just so that you can see the screen. All right, now I want you to give your wrists a little twist, and another twist, and another twist, and another twist until they come all the way back around. Now, even though I can't see you, something tells me that you're a little bit stuck and you weren't able to twist your wrists around the way that I just did. So why does this game work? Well, this is a phenomenon called inattentional blindness, which refers to any situation where your eyes see something, but your brain doesn't process it. Your brain didn't process the rearrangement of my hands because you were too busy thinking about holding your hands up and listening to my instructions and watching the video. All of these factors subtly motivate you to turn your attention inwards so that you do not have your attention turned outwards to see what I'm doing. Magicians can also do this by asking a question. For example, a magician might say something like, "Are you right or left-handed?" In order to answer the question, you have to turn your attention inwards to think, am I right-handed or am I left-handed? And once again, that gives the magician a moment of opportunity to do something sneaky. Now, inattentional blindness, when applied correctly, basically lets you blindfold your audience, in a cognitive sense, for a few seconds, which is an incredibly powerful tool for a magician. Now for level 4, we come back to the cards. I'll put the blue deck aside for now. I'm going to take a card out of the red deck at random, doesn't matter which one. Now, in a moment, I'm going to show you this card. It's very important that you remember the card, okay? So, I will turn away. I want you to remember this card, lock that card in your memory. Now, I'm going to put your card towards the middle of the deck, and notice that it goes face down into the middle of the deck like this. My goal is to get your card to turn over so it's facing the opposite direction from the rest of the cards. Now, I could just go through the deck, find your card and turn it over like this, or I can snap my fingers and make every card in the deck turn face up except for one, and it is your ace of hearts. Now I'm going to explain exactly how this card trick worked. There was a little bit of secret setup that I did before the trick started. I had secretly reversed 2 cards on the bottom of the deck. So the whole deck was face down, and I had 2 cards face up on the bottom. So I took out a card at random, which happened to be the ace of hearts, and I said, okay, I'm gonna show you the card. Now, as I was holding this card up, watch my left hand. My left hand did this. So now when I put this card back into the middle of the deck, it's going face down into a face-up deck of cards, except for these 2 decoy cards on top of the deck. So all that's left is to turn one of the decoy cards face up, and then when I spread the deck out like this, everything is face up except for one card in the middle, which is the ace of hearts. And I just make sure that I don't spread these too widely so that I can hide the face-down card that's still here. So now that you know how the trick works, let's talk about why it works. This might be called moving the spotlight. We live with the persistent illusion that we perceive everything around us, but actually we perceive only a small part of our surroundings and our brain fills in the rest. Our attention is a very narrow spotlight. Misdirection only works if you don't know that you're being misdirected. So if I said, look right here, it would be pretty obvious that I'm trying to direct your attention. But if instead I tell you that I'm going to show you a card and that it's very important for you to remember it, now you have a compelling reason to look right here while I do something else over here, like turning the deck over. In addition, we are social creatures and we have a natural propensity to follow large gestures. By exaggerating the gesture of showing the card, I further ensure that you will look right here and not over here. Now, while moving the spotlight is a more intuitive and more well-known form of misdirection, it's still incredibly useful, because if your audience is looking at the wrong place at the wrong time, well, they're not going to see the trickery that was happening. But there's one other important point in this example, which is that after the misdirection had occurred, you weren't aware that anything was amiss just yet. Now, in order to explain, we're going to need a very precise definition of magic. Magic is the difference between the initial condition and the final condition with the impression that there is no causal link. I'll say that again. Magic is the difference between an initial condition and a final condition with the impression that there is no causal link. I'll give you an example. Now, for a level 5, we're going to use the ace of hearts again. Now notice that the ink on the ace of hearts is red. This red ace of hearts is the initial condition. I'm going to put that ace of hearts down here on the table. Now, of course, the ink on the back of the card is also red, but that's not the ink that I care about. Now watch very closely. If I snap my fingers 3 times like this, you'll see that the ace of hearts has now turned black. The ink on the card is now black. So this black ace of hearts, this is the final condition. So in this example, the initial condition was the red ace of hearts, and the final condition was the black ace of hearts. Think about if someone had walked into the room after I'd put that card face down on the table. Then I might turn the card over and people in the audience would applaud, but that person who walked in would be very confused seeing me hold up a card and having lots of people applaud. They might think that they'd walked into a cult of the ace of hearts or something like that. The reason is they missed the initial condition. If they didn't know that the ace of hearts was red beforehand, there's no reason that the fact that it's now black should be impressive. Similarly, if I showed you the red ace of hearts, put it on the table, and then someone walked out of the room, they would never experience the final condition when I turn it over and reveal the black ace of hearts. So they would never experience any magic. To experience a magical effect, you must be present for the initial condition and the final condition, and you must have the impression that there is no causal link between them. So in the card trick that I did in level 4, the reason that you weren't aware that I'd turned the deck over was because of these 2 face-down decoy cards right here. They masked that change. In other words, I used misdirection to cover up the dirty work. I got you to look at just the right place at just the right time. For me. But afterwards, I had to keep you from realizing that the tricky part was over when you didn't even know that the trick had started yet. Now, the reason that it's so important for a magician to understand the purpose of the initial condition and the final condition is that half the battle is about getting you to not see what you're not supposed to see, but the other half of the battle is making sure that you actually appreciate the magic that occurs. And if you miss the initial condition or the final condition because you're distracted or because the magician didn't do a good job explaining what was going on, well, you're just not going to experience any magic. Now, for level 6, let's take a look at the rest of the deck. Notice anything strange? If not, why don't I remove the Joker? Just like the Ace of Hearts used to be red, but now the card is black, you'll notice that the King of Spades, well, this is supposed to be a black card, right? Spades are supposed to be black, but the pips on this card are red. The 10 of Diamonds is supposed to be a red card, except you'll notice that it is black, and the 7 of Clubs is supposed to be a black card, except you'll notice that it is red. And it's not just those cards, it's every card in the deck. Every single card has changed color. The hearts and the diamonds are black, and the spades and the clubs are red. Now this is an example of change blindness, which refers to a situation where something changes in the environment, but you aren't aware of the change, even though you're staring at the thing that is changed in some way. In this case, the change is from a deck of cards where the suits are the proper colors to a deck of cards where the suits are no longer the proper colors. But unless you're looking really, really closely at those cards, and unless you've really memorized that, hey, the diamonds and the hearts are supposed to be red and the clubs and the spades are supposed to be black, when you're looking at a jumble of cards on the table, especially if some of the cards, like the Ace of Hearts, momentarily, were still the right color, well, it's very difficult to notice that anything is amiss. Now, change blindness is often used in much more subtle ways than this example with the cards that changed color on the faces. For example, if a magician needs to switch one object on the table for another object, the objects can be identical, but after the switch, it may be the case that the new object is at a slightly different angle or in a slightly different position than the old one, and you're just not going to notice this slight change, even though it happened right in front of you, as long as your attention is appropriately directed at lots of other things and you're not just staring at that one spot on the table. Now, for levels 7, 8, and 9, we're going to go back to the blue deck in just a moment. Now, you might remember that at the very beginning, I gave these cards some shuffles and some cuts. And I gave them shuffles like this, for example. And I also gave them some cuts like this, for example. And because of that, all these red cards, obviously, are all mixed up. Now, I also shuffled and cut that blue deck of cards. But these blue cards, they're not all mixed up. The Ace of Hearts is followed by the 2, which is followed by the 3, and the 4, and the 5, and the 6, and the 7, and the 8, and the 9, and the 10, and the Jack, and the Queen, and the King. But it's not just the hearts, it's every card in the deck. The Ace to King of Hearts, the Ace to King of Clubs, Ace to King of Diamonds, and the Ace to King of Spades. Every single card in perfect numerical order. So how did I get that blue deck back in order? Well, I'm going to repeat what I did at the very beginning. At the very start, I legitimately shuffled the red deck, and I legitimately gave it some cuts. However, I never shuffled the blue deck. I only gave it some cuts. And furthermore, the cuts that I gave the blue deck are what are called false cuts. So you can see that right now, this blue deck is in perfect numerical order. Ace to King of Hearts, Ace to King of Clubs, Ace to King of Diamonds, Ace to King of Spades. And I'm going to give it that same sequence of cuts. And even though it looks like I'm cutting the deck, I'm actually using sleight of hand to undo the cuts, which restores perfect numerical order. But how did I get you to not remember this? How did I get you to not remember that I never shuffled the blue deck? Well, I did this using 3 techniques that will make up levels 7, 8, and 9. Level 7 is mixing true and false statements. Level 8 is using hand gestures, and level 9 is using a time delay. So level 7 is the mixture of true and false statements. If I said, I shuffled the blue deck, well, you might object to that statement because, of course, I never shuffled the blue deck. But if instead I said, now you'll remember that I gave all of these cards some cuts and shuffles, well, it's true that I shuffled the red deck, and it's true that I cut the red deck, and it's true that I cut the blue deck, but it's not true that I shuffled the blue deck. So by mixing in a lie amongst many truths, I make it more likely that you're going to accept this lie and believe it because it's hiding amongst all of these true statements. Now, level 8 is the use of hand gestures. At the very beginning, when I said that I was going to shuffle the cards, I used this hand gesture. I interlaced my fingers the same way cards are interlaced in a riffle shuffle. Then, at the end, when I recapped your experience, I used the same hand gesture, further reinforcing the lie that I was telling you. Level 9 is the use of a time delay. If I had not shuffled the blue deck and then I immediately claimed to have shuffled all the cards, well, even though I'm still mixing true and false statements together, you would probably remember that I just didn't shuffle the blue deck. However, if I let 10 or so minutes elapse between the time when I shuffle all of the cards and the time when I recap your experience, you're a lot less likely to remember the specifics of the shuffle sequences, so it's much easier for me to lie to you. So at the very end, when I recap your experience, I'm actually distorting your experience. I'm implanting a false memory using level 7, mixing true and false statements, level 8, hand gestures, and level 9, a time delay. Now, obviously, being able to manipulate the memory of your audience is an incredibly potent tool, because if they can't remember what actually happened during the performance, there's no way they'll be able to figure it out after the fact. Furthermore, you can use different types of memory manipulation techniques to actually get them to remember effects that you performed as more impressive or more impossible than what actually happened during the performance. But I would be remiss in my duties as a magician if I didn't leave you with some lasting mystery. Now, for level 10, we'll come back to the red deck of cards. Now, I'm going to take these red-backed cards, which are all mixed up, and I'm going to give them a few more shuffles like so. And after this next shuffle, I will attempt to locate one card in particular. So I'm going to give these cards a cut like so, and hopefully I should have been able to cut to the Ace of Hearts. I'm going to give these cards another shuffle, like so. And after this shuffle, I'll give the cards another cut, and I should be able to find a similar card, like, for example, the Two of Hearts. For the Three of Hearts, I'll give the cards a cut, and you'll see it spin out of the deck. The Four of Hearts will flip out of the middle of the deck. I believe the 5 is 13th from the top, so I just have to pull out the 13th card for the 5 of Hearts. I'll find the 6 and the 7 at the same time. That should be the 6 and the 7 of Hearts, and I'm going to use both of these cards to find the 8. So I will stab them into the middle of the deck, locating the 8 of Hearts in between them. You'll see the 9 come spinning out of the deck. There's the 9 of Hearts, and I'll try to find the 10, the Jack, the Queen, the King all at once. That should be the 10 and the Jack and the Queen and the King of Hearts. But I'm not just going to find the hearts. That would be far too easy. So I'm going to take the rest of these cards and I will give them one last shuffle. And now it's not just the hearts that are in order. It's also the Ace of Clubs and the Two of Clubs and the 3 and the 4 and the 5 and the 6 and the 7, the 8, the 9, the 10, the Jack, the Queen, and the King. But it's not just the hearts. It's not just the clubs. It's every card in the deck. The Ace to King of Hearts, Ace to King of Clubs, Ace to King of Diamonds, and the Ace to King of Spades. Every card, once again, in perfect numerical order. And that is 10 levels of deception. Now, throughout this video, I have explained some of how these tricks work, but I've actually left a good portion of them unexplained. The truth is that how magic tricks work is actually rather boring. The explanations are usually not that interesting, they're unsatisfying to people who aren't magicians, and furthermore, they fundamentally change your experience of magic. If you know how a trick works, you're no longer going to have that visceral, oh my gosh, how did that happen? How did you do it? Experience of wonder. You might still be able to appreciate the cleverness or the ingenuity or the skill, but that central experience of visceral wonder just won't happen anymore. However, why magic works is a much more interesting and I think much more satisfying question to answer. Now, of course, it wouldn't have been possible to make this video without explaining some of the how. None of the why sections at the end of each level would have made any sense if you didn't have a little bit of the how to link the demonstration to all the discussion afterward. But luckily, in order to appreciate why magic tricks work, you actually don't have to understand everything about how they work. And furthermore, understanding why they work doesn't diminish your experience of the magic. You can appreciate why you carried some kind of false assumption, or why your memory is fallible, or why you are vulnerable to certain forms of misdirection. But when these techniques are expertly applied in magic, you will still have the same how did you do it experience. Because if the techniques are applied well, just knowing that they exist isn't going to help you figuring out that magic trick, and it's not going to impact that central experience of wonder. So understand that my purpose in making this video is not just to expose secrets to ruin people's experience or just to give it away for fun, but rather to explain why magic tricks work. Because I think the answers to these why questions have many implications that are relevant to critical and central aspects of the human experience, upon which magic has the unique ability to shine a very bright light. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked this video, please give it a like, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing to the channel and following me on social media. If you're interested in taking private lessons, I teach magicians of all levels, or if you want to book a show, you can contact me on my website. Links are in the description, along with the credits and the inspirations for this video. See you next time!